The transfer order landed on my desk on a Tuesday morning in March 1983. Behavioral Corrections Facility, 12. The name meant nothing to me, but the red stamp across the top stopped my breath. In 6 years of corrections work, I had never seen a classification level that high. When I asked the clerks at the regional office about it, they didn't just claim ignorance, they stopped making eye contact. Fedorov called me in that afternoon. He didn't offer me tea. He just slid the transfer order across the desk and said the one thing he knew I couldn't say no to. This isn't just a posting, Lev. It's an inheritance. Your father gave everything to this state, and now you have the chance to finish what he started. He smiled, and I felt my chest swell with pride. I didn't see the trap. I just heard him say that I was finally good enough to be my father's son. You will be helping build a better Soviet Union, he promised, faster than anyone thought possible. I took the train east for 2 days and thought about my father. He had been a party member his entire adult life, a true believer who never wavered. He died when I was 19, and I still carried his party card in my breast pocket. Doubting the system meant doubting everything he had lived for. The facility emerged from forest. Concrete walls, razor wire, guard towers. Inside, the staff moved with military efficiency. These were serious people doing serious work. That night, I lay in my bunk, listening to the silence. No shouting, no clanging doors. The kind of silence you find in a morgue, not a prison. I convinced myself the facility was simply well run. I almost believed that. The next morning, I met Dr. Yermolov. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and an exhausting energy. He shook my hand firmly and led me through a series of corridors to an observation room overlooking what he called the treatment wing. Through the reinforced glass, I could see a row of chairs that looked almost like dentist chairs, each one equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment. Medical staff in white coats moved between stations, checking instruments and making notes on clipboards. You are wondering what we do here. Yermolov turned from the window. It wasn't a question. I admitted that I was. He smiled. We have developed a compound, he explained, that alters the subjective experience of time at the neurological level. The mechanism is complex, but the result is simple. A subject who receives an injection will perceive minutes as months, hours as years. We can deliver an entire prison sentence worth of isolation and reflection in a single afternoon. The data is consistent across all trials. I didn't understand. He must have seen the confusion on my face because he continued, speaking faster now, his hands moving as he talked. Consider the implications, Comrade Petrenko. A man commits a crime that warrants 5 years of imprisonment. Under the traditional system, we house him and feed him and guard him for 5 years. We spend resources, we occupy space. And at the end, perhaps he is reformed, perhaps he isn't. With the compound, we can give him those 5 years of experienced time in a matter of hours. He feels every day of his sentence. He has time to reflect, to understand his mistakes, to rebuild himself. And then he returns to society, rehabilitated, while only a single day has passed in the real world. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were bright with what I can only call faith. We aren't punishing criminals, Lev. We are saving them. We are giving them the gift of time. Through the glass, an orderly led a young man to one of the chairs. They strapped him in, and a technician prepared the injection. This subject was convicted of theft, Yermolov said. His sentence was 3 years. Watch. The injection was administered. The man's body went rigid for a moment, then relaxed completely. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something none of us could see. For 4 minutes, nothing happened. He simply sat there, breathing slowly, his face occasionally shifting through expressions I couldn't read. Then he blinked, his eyes focused. He looked around the room like a man waking from a long sleep, and when his gaze found the observation window, he began to cry. Not the angry tears of a man who felt wronged. These were something else. Gratitude, maybe. Relief. He said something to the orderly that I couldn't hear through the glass, and the orderly nodded and began removing his restraints. "He is thanking them," Yermolov's voice dropped. "They always do afterward." He moved slowly, carefully, like someone much older than he appeared. When he passed the window, he looked up at us and nodded. A small gesture of acknowledgement. Then he was gone, led away to wherever the reformed subjects went next. "What you are seeing," Yermolov said, "is the future of Soviet corrections. No more wasted years, no more overcrowded facilities, no more criminals returning to society unchanged. This is rehabilitation perfected." I believed him. Standing in that observation room, watching a man walk out reformed after only 4 minutes in a chair, I believed every word. The compound was a miracle of Soviet science. It was efficient. It was humane. It was everything the system should be. I reported for duty the next morning, ready to serve. My father would have been proud. The weeks that followed were, for a time, the most satisfying of my career. I should have known that feeling would not last. I settled into the rhythm of Facility 12 the way you settle into a new pair of boots, uncomfortable at first, but gradually molding to fit. My duties were straightforward. I monitored the treatment wing during processing sessions, escorted subjects to and from their cells, and filed the observation reports that the research staff required after each procedure. It was good work, important work, and the results spoke for themselves. Subject after subject went into those chairs angry or defiant and came out different, quieter. They thanked the staff. They asked for work. They spoke about their crimes with distant regret, as if discussing someone else. I documented every case carefully. The success rate was unlike anything I had seen in corrections. In my previous postings, rehabilitation was a hope more than an expectation. You processed inmates through their sentences, and maybe 1 in 10 showed genuine change. The rest just learned to be more careful about getting caught. Here at Facility 12, the numbers were reversed. 9 out of 10 subjects emerged from treatment, ready to rejoin society as productive citizens. Some of them even requested extended sentences, asking for more time under the drug's influence so they could reflect more deeply on their past choices. Dr. Yermolov always denied these requests, explaining that the standard dosage was carefully calibrated and that more was not necessarily better. But the fact that they asked at all told me everything I needed to know about the program's effectiveness. I wrote positive reports. It was sometime during my 3rd week that I started noticing things. Small things at first. The kind of details that only stand out when you were the sort of person who paid attention to paperwork. A reformed subject's intake form listed his age as 32, but the man I saw in the yard looked closer to 45. Gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that seemed too deep for someone his age. I mentioned it to one of the medical staff, a young technician named Anya who handled post-treatment assessments. Stress response. She did not look up from her clipboard. The subjective experience of extended time can manifest in cosmetic ways. The mind ages, and the body shows sympathy. It is documented in the literature. I accepted the explanation. It made sense in a clinical sort of way. The compound made people feel like years had passed, so naturally there might be some physical expression of that experience. But I kept noticing. They did not fidget. I realized this during a routine cell inspection about a month into my posting. Normal prisoners could not sit still. They paced. They picked at their clothes. They shifted on their bunks and tapped their feet and filled the silence with small, restless movements. It was one of the universal constants of prison life, the way confined men tried to burn off the energy they could not release. They did not do any of that. They sat on their cots with their hands resting on their knees, perfectly still, watching the walls or the doors or nothing at all. When I walked past during inspections, their heads would turn to follow me. Not with hostility, not even with particular interest, just awareness. They tracked my movement like cameras, smooth and automatic. I accepted it as a sign of the program's success. They had served their time, subjectively speaking. They had made peace with their circumstances. Of course, they were calm. What was there to be restless about? Then, Ruslan Jarkov arrived. I remembered Jarkov's intake clearly. The staff were genuinely concerned. He was a large man, built for hard labor, with hands that looked capable of serious damage. His file was thick with incident reports from previous facilities. 2 guards killed at a labor camp in Siberia. 3 more attacked during transport, one of them badly enough to require reconstructive surgery. The psychologist's assessment used words like uncontrollable and pathologically violent and unsuitable for standard rehabilitation protocols. He had been Red Army, served in Afghanistan. His unit was ambushed on patrol. He was the only survivor. The guards he killed had reminded him of the officers who sent his men into that ambush. That was the theory. Jarkov never explained. They brought him in shackled, 4 guards instead of the usual 2. He did not fight. He did not need to. The threat of violence surrounded him like a smell. Even Dr. Yermolov seemed more cautious than usual when he reviewed Jarkov's file. "This one is different," Yermolov said during the intake briefing. "Standard dosing protocols may not be sufficient for a subject with this level of resistance to behavioral modification. I am recommending an extended session." One of the other researchers raised a concern about safety margins. Yermolov waved it away. The subject has been classified as unrehabilitatable by 3 separate facilities. He is scheduled for permanent detention regardless of our intervention. If the extended protocol fails, we lose nothing. If it succeeds, we gain invaluable data about the substance's upper limits. I understood what he was saying. Jarkov was expendable. Whatever happened to him in that chair, no one would ask difficult questions afterward. They scheduled his treatment for the following morning. That night, I was assigned to the detail that moved him from holding to the treatment wing. There were 6 of us, all armed, all trained in restraint techniques. Jarkov walked between us without resistance, his chains rattling with each step, his eyes fixed straight ahead. We were halfway down the corridor when he spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational, and he did not turn his head to look at any of us. "Uniform does not make you different," he said. "Just puts you on the other side." No one responded. We kept walking, delivered him to the treatment wing, and transferred custody to the medical staff. As they strapped him into the chair, Jarkov closed his eyes and went still. Not struggling, not afraid, just still, the way you might wait for a bus you knew was coming. The extended dose was administered the next morning. Standard protocol called for 4 minutes of real time, corresponding to approximately 18 months of subjective experience. Jarkov received 40 minutes. I watched from the observation room with Dr. Yermolov. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then, the changes started. His expressions began cycling: fear, rage, despair, calm, fear again. Faster than I could track, like watching years compressed into seconds. They administered the counteragent. Jarkov opened his eyes. The predator was gone. The coiled violence that had surrounded him had simply vanished. He blinked slowly, looked around, and turned his gaze toward the observation window. He smiled. It was a gentle smile, the kind you might see on the face of a grandfather watching children play. Warm, patient, and completely wrong on the face of a man who had killed with his bare hands. "Thank you." His voice carried through the intercom, soft and sincere. "I understand now. I needed the time." Dr. Yermolov's pen stopped moving. Even he seemed unsettled by the transformation. They released Jarkov from the chair and he stood slowly, carefully, like a man much older than his file suggested. He thanked each member of the medical staff individually. He asked if there was work he could do to contribute to the facility's operations. He expressed hope that his case might help other troubled souls find the same peace he had discovered. He was led away to the reformed subjects wing, and I tried to feel proud. This was the program working exactly as intended. A violent criminal transformed into a model citizen. Evidence that no one was beyond redemption, that Soviet science could reshape even the most damaged minds. But I kept thinking about that smile, about how it did not quite reach his eyes. I decided it did not matter. Results were results. I almost convinced myself. In the days that followed Jarkov's treatment, everything should have felt like a success. It did not. I tried to focus on my duties. There were reports to file and schedules to maintain, and all the small bureaucratic tasks that kept a facility like ours running smoothly. I was good at those tasks. I had always found comfort in paperwork, in the predictability of forms and procedures and checklists that told you exactly what needed to be done and in what order. But Jarkov kept drawing my attention. He had been moved to the reformed subjects wing 3 days after his extended session, and by all official measures, he was a model prisoner. He followed every instruction without complaint. He volunteered for work details that other inmates avoided. He was polite to the guards, helpful to the medical staff, and cooperative with the researchers who periodically called him in for follow-up assessments. On paper, he was exactly what the program was designed to produce. I started finding reasons to walk past his cell during my rounds. He was always awake when I passed. Always sitting on his cot, hands resting on his knees, facing the door as if he had been waiting for me specifically. He never called out or made requests the way other prisoners did. He just watched me approach, and then he smiled that still smile, and then he watched me walk away. His head would turn to track my movement until I rounded the corner, smooth and steady, like the lens of a camera following a target. The other reformed subjects had started doing the same thing. I noticed it during a night shift about 2 weeks after Jarkov's treatment. I was walking the corridor alone, just a routine check, and when I looked through the cell windows, I realized that every single reformed subject was awake. Not reading, not pacing, not doing anything at all. Facing their doors, hands folded, waiting. When I passed each cell, the head inside would turn to follow me. The same smooth movement, the same quiet attention. I mentioned it to Anya during a break the next day. She was reviewing post-treatment assessments, and she barely looked up when I spoke. They often report changes in sleep patterns. She continued. The subjective experience of extended time can disrupt circadian rhythms. They are adjusting. I wanted to know how long the adjustment usually took. She shrugged. Varies. Some subjects normalize within weeks, others take longer. It is not considered a negative outcome as long as they remain compliant. Compliant. That was the word she used. Not healthy, not recovered. Compliant. I let it go. There was nothing in the regulations that required prisoners to sleep on a schedule, and they were not causing any problems. If anything, they were easier to manage than the general population. They never complained about food. They never requested transfers or medical attention or any of the 100 small things that normal prisoners demanded on a daily basis. They just sat there. I convinced myself that stillness was better than fighting. I mentioned the stillness to another guard one evening, a veteran named Fedorov, who had been here longer than anyone. He looked at me the way you look at someone who is about to make a mistake. You are overthinking, Petrenko. They have been processed. That is all that matters. He returned to his paperwork. Keep your head down. File your reports. Do not complicate things. I never brought it up again. The nickname incident happened on a Thursday morning. I was doing cell inspections in the reformed wing, the same routine I had followed dozens of times before. Open the slot, check that the prisoner was present and accounted for, note any unusual conditions. Jarkov's cell was near the end of the corridor. When I opened the slot, he was sitting in his usual position, palms down on his knees, facing the door. He looked up at me with that gentle smile, and for a moment, everything was normal. Then, he spoke. "You remind me of someone, Lyova." I stopped writing mid-word. The pencil hovered over the inspection form, frozen, and I felt something cold settle into my stomach. Lyova. My grandmother's nickname for me. She had called me that since I was a child, a diminutive that no one else in the world had ever used. She died when I was 16, and I had not heard that name spoken aloud in almost 15 years. There was no way Jarkov could know it. No way anyone at this facility could know it. I had never mentioned my grandmother to anyone here. It was not in my personnel file. It was not in any file. Jarkov watched me through the slot, still smiling. "Someone kind," he added. "Someone who believed in the right things." I closed the slot and walked away. My hands were shaking, and I had to stop at the end of the corridor to steady myself before I could continue the inspection. I told myself it was a coincidence. Lyova was not an unusual diminutive. He could have been guessing, just making conversation, trying to unsettle me the way prisoners sometimes did when they wanted to assert some small measure of power. But he had not said it like a guess. He had said it like a fact, like he knew. I did not report the incident. A prisoner had used a common Russian nickname. That was all. But that night I dreamed about my grandmother. She was sitting in her old kitchen, crying. "You should not have gone to that place, Lyova. They are not what they seem." I woke up, sweating. The recognition incident happened the following week. 2 reformed subjects from different wings were being transferred to the medical bay for routine checkups. I was escorting one of them, a former embezzler named Dmitry, who had been processed about a month before Jarkov. He walked beside me in silence, compliant and still, his eyes fixed straight ahead. When we reached the medical bay, another guard was already there with a different subject, a young man whose name I did not remember. They had been processed at different times, housed in different wings, and according to the records, they had never interacted. There was no reason for them to know each other. But when Dmitry saw the other man, something changed in his face. Not recognition exactly, but an expression I couldn't name. A kind of acknowledgement, as if he was seeing an old friend he had not expected to encounter. The other man looked at Dmitry identically. Dmitry reached out and touched the other man's shoulder, a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial. The other man nodded just once. They stood there for a moment, these 2 strangers who had never met, looking at each other with an understanding I had no name for. I reported the incident to Dr. Yermolov that afternoon. He listened carefully, made some notes, and told me it was likely an example of what he called convergent psychological response. Subjects who undergo similar experiences often develop similar coping mechanisms, he explained. They may feel a sense of kinship with others who have shared that experience, even if they have never met in the traditional sense. It is actually a positive indicator. It suggests the treatment is creating consistent outcomes across different subject profiles. I asked if he was concerned about what I had witnessed. 2 strangers who seemed to recognize each other without words. Yermolov smiled, the smile of a teacher correcting a student who had made a reasonable but incorrect assumption. "The compound creates a subjective experience of isolation," he said. "The subjects feel as if they have been somewhere else, somewhere apart from the world. When they return to normal consciousness, it is natural for them to describe that transition in terms of a journey. Coming back is simply a metaphor for regaining awareness. There is nothing mystical about it." He returned to his work, and I understood that the conversation was over. I left his office and tried to accept his explanation, but I kept thinking about the way Dmitry had touched the other man's shoulder, the way they had looked at each other. like veterans of the same war recognizing each other in a crowd, like men who had been to that place. I started paying closer attention during my rounds, noting the small behaviors that did not fit the standard patterns of prisoner conduct. The wrongness had patterns. They blinked at irregular intervals, sometimes 40 seconds without blinking. When they did, it was slow and deliberate, like someone remembering to perform the action. I submitted my reports and followed my procedures and tried not to think too much about what I was seeing. But at night, when the facility went quiet and I lay in my bunk listening to that unnatural silence, I couldn't stop the questions from forming. If their minds had simply been reformed by the compound, why did they all behave identically? If they had just experienced subjective time in isolation, why did they recognize each other? And if they were truly rehabilitated, truly at peace with themselves and the world, why did they spend every night sitting in the dark, facing their doors, expecting something I couldn't see? I had no answers, but I was beginning to suspect that Dr. Yermolov didn't have answers either. He just had explanations, and I was starting to understand that those were not the same thing. Dr. Yermolov started drinking more heavily around the 3rd month of my posting. That should have told me something. I noticed it first during the morning briefings, the slight tremor in his hands when he held his notes, the way his eyes seemed unfocused until he had finished his first cup of tea. The other staff either couldn't notice or pretended not to. Yermolov was the architect of the program, the man whose vision had made all of this possible. If he needed something to steady his nerves, that was his business. I found him alone in the staff quarters one evening, a bottle of vodka on the table in front of him, already half empty. It was late, well past the hour when most personnel had retired to their bunks, and I had only come to the common area because I couldn't sleep. The questions had been keeping me awake more often lately, circling through my mind like animals pacing a cage. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw something in his face that I had never seen before. Not the confident scientist who spoke of progress and data and consistent outcomes. Something older. Something tired. "Petrenko," he said. "Sit down. Have a drink with me." I sat. He poured me a glass without asking if I wanted one, and I accepted it because refusing would have been awkward. We drank in silence for a while, the only sound the distant hum of the facility's ventilation system and the occasional creak of the building settling around us. "You have been watching them," he said finally. It was not a question. I admitted that I had. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "You are a careful man, Petrenko. You notice things. That is why they assigned you here. They wanted someone who would document everything precisely, who would follow procedures, who wouldn't ask questions that might complicate the reports." He took another drink. "But you are asking questions now. I can see it in the way you look at them." I didn't deny it. There was no point. "What happens to them?" I asked. "When they are under the drug's influence, where do they go?" Yermolov was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, as if he was afraid of being overheard. "We do not know." I waited for him to continue. He refilled his glass before he did. The drug was developed to create a subjective experience of isolation, time dilation through neurochemical manipulation. That was the theory. The subject's brain would simulate years of reflection in minutes. He paused, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. But the brain activity we observe during treatment doesn't match the models. It doesn't match anything we have seen before. The subjects are not simulating isolation. They are experiencing something real, something consistent across all trials. I wanted to know what he meant by consistent. They describe it afterward. All of them, the same details. Things they could not possibly know, unless... He trailed off, staring into his glass. I felt the cold settling into my stomach again. Unless what? Yermolov shook his head. It was the gesture of a man who had run out of explanations. I thought we were pioneers. I thought we were doing something good. He laughed, a bitter sound. We are not rehabilitating them, Petrenko. We are sending them somewhere. And something there is sending them back. He finished his drink and stood up unsteadily. I have said too much. Forget this conversation. Go back to your duties. File your reports. He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at me. And stay away from the reformed subjects. Whatever they are now, they aren't what they were before. I don't know what that makes them, but I know I don't trust it. He left. I sat alone in the common area for a long time, the untouched vodka growing warm in my glass, thinking about gray walls and endless corridors, and the voice that came through the intercom at the exact time every day. The next morning, I began testing the reformed subjects in small ways. Nothing official, nothing that would appear in the reports. I just wanted to see how they reacted to things that should have been familiar to them. I started with Jarkov. I brought a photograph to his cell, one that I had found in his intake file. It showed a woman and 2 children standing in front of a small house somewhere in the countryside. His family, according to the records. His wife and daughters waiting for a man who would never come home. When I showed him the photograph, Jarkov looked at it with polite interest. No recognition, no emotion. He studied it the way you might study a picture in a magazine, curious but detached. Who are they? He asked. I told him they were his family, his wife Katya, his daughters Mila and Vera. The names were in his file. Jarkov smiled that still smile and shook his head. I don't remember them, he said. I'm sorry, was I supposed to? I questioned him about his crimes, the guards he had killed, the years he had spent in other facilities. I remember those, he said. The facts of them anyway, but they feel like stories someone told me about someone else. I know they happened, but they don't feel like mine. I questioned him about the facility, about Behavioral Corrections Facility 12, about the treatment wing and the observation rooms and the corridor that led from the holding cells to the medical bay. His answers were precise, perfect. He could describe the exact number of steps between his cell and the common area. He could tell me which lights flickered during evening inspections and which guard had a habit of arriving 3 minutes late for the night shift. He knew the facility better than I did, and I had been walking those corridors for months. He remembered everything about this place. He remembered nothing about who he had been before he came here. I tested other reformed subjects over the following days. The results were the same. They couldn't recall their families, their crimes, their hometowns, their childhood memories. But they knew the facility inside and out. They knew each other, even subjects who had never officially met. They knew things they shouldn't have known, like the nickname my grandmother used for me or the fact that Guardvolovich always checked his watch at exactly 14 minutes past the hour. And they were patient. So patient. They answered my questions without irritation, without curiosity about why I was asking. They smiled in that way that made my skin crawl and waited for me to leave, and then they returned to their stillness. The Moscow inspectors arrived 2 weeks later. There were 3 of them, bureaucrats in suits who spoke in the careful language of official reports. They moved through the facility with Dr. Yermolov, reviewing data, interviewing subjects. They carried identical briefcases, setting them down at matching angles during each stop. When they took notes, their pens moved in the same rhythm. I told myself it was coincidence, training, professional uniformity. But when they smiled at the end of the tour, it was that smile. The one I had seen on every processed subject in the facility. I stood in the back during the final briefing. They praised the efficiency, the rehabilitation rates, the cost savings. Revolutionary, transformative, a model for the future. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell them about the wrongness I had seen, the identical behaviors, the shared memories of a place that shouldn't exist, The processed men who remembered everything about the facility and nothing about their own lives. But I looked at the faces around me, at the other guards who had surely noticed the same things I had, and I saw nothing. No concern, just the careful blankness of men who had learned not to ask questions. I stayed silent. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to think the inspectors knew more than I did, that they had data I hadn't seen, that surely they wouldn't approve something dangerous. The order came down 3 days later. The compound program was to be expanded immediately. Every correctional facility in the Soviet Union would receive supplies and training within 6 months. Every inmate in the system would be processed. I did the math in my head. There were over 1 million prisoners in Soviet facilities, labor camps, psychiatric institutions, juvenile detention centers. All of them would be given the injection. All of them would be sent to that gray place, whatever it was. All of them would come back changed. I thought about what Dr. Yermolov had said. Something there is sending them back. 1 million doors opening. And Moscow was calling it progress. I submitted a request for transfer the same day. It was denied. My expertise was needed during the expansion phase. I was a trusted member of the team. I thought about running, about disappearing into the forests and never looking back. But I stayed. I filed my reports and walked my rounds and watched the buses begin to arrive, bringing new subjects from facilities across the region for processing. They watched them too, standing at the windows of the common area, their faces pressed to the glass, smiling their calm smiles as the new arrivals shuffled off the transports. I found Jarkov in his cell one afternoon, sitting in his usual position on the cot, palms down on his knees. He didn't look up when I approached, but he knew I was there. He always knew. "You have been asking questions," he said. His voice was calm, conversational. "The others have noticed. They think you are beginning to understand." I asked what I was supposed to understand. He turned to look at me, and for just a moment, the gentle mask slipped. Something else looked out through his eyes. Something old, something patient, something that had been waiting for a very long time. "There's a place," he said, "where time doesn't end, where you serve your sentence forever. The real Ruslan is still there, serving. He will always be there." The smile returned, sliding back into place like a mask being adjusted. "But I'm here now. We all are, and there's so much room for more." He reached through the bars, his fingers brushing my hand. His skin was ice cold. "The state notices loyalty. They will reward you, soon." He withdrew his hand and returned to his stillness, leaving me standing alone in the corridor, my skin still tingling where he had touched it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bunk and listened to the silence and thought about a place where time didn't end, and I wondered how many of the men I had watched being reformed were still there. And I wondered what was wearing their faces now. 6 months passed. By the end, I understood what we had built. By then, it was far too late. The expansion moved with frightening efficiency. Trucks, technicians, new processing wings rising at facilities across the country. I watched it happen from my post, filing reports and trying not to think about what we were building. They watched it too, standing at windows and doorways, smiling at each other across the yard. Small, knowing expressions. They were waiting for something. Now I was beginning to understand what. The final processing day was a Tuesday in September. Every inmate had been through the compound. The cells were full of them, quiet and identical. Now there was nothing left but to prepare them for release. They filed out in orderly rows, moving without instructions. Each bus held 40 passengers, 12 buses, 500 from our facility alone. And this was just one facility. Across the country, identical scenes at hundreds of locations, thousands of buses, millions of passengers. I thought about the families waiting for these men, wives and children who would open their doors to strangers wearing familiar faces, a million quiet invasions spreading through the system, and no one would notice. The faces would be the same, only the thing behind the eyes would be different. I watched them board. They moved in silence, finding their seats without discussion, settling into that stillness with their hands resting on their knees. Through the windows, I could see row after row of calm faces, all turned forward, waiting. The first bus began to pull away. As it passed the gate where I was standing, every face in every window turned toward me, as if controlled by a single impulse. They were smiling, that identical smile. They watched me until the bus rounded the curve and disappeared into the trees. Then the next bus passed, and the same thing happened. And the next, and the next. I stood there for nearly an hour, watching bus after bus roll past, watching hundreds of faces turn toward me in unison and smile that wrong smile. Some of them I recognized, subjects I had processed, inmates I had escorted to the treatment wing, men whose files I had memorized during long nights of paperwork. One was the thief from my first observation, the one who had wept with gratitude after only 4 minutes in the chair. Now his eyes held no tears, only that unblinking watchfulness. Another was Dmitri, the embezzler who had touched a stranger's shoulder and spoken of coming back. They all knew me now, in a way I didn't want to be known. None of them waved. None of them spoke. They just watched me with those watchful eyes until they were out of sight. When the last bus was gone, the facility felt empty in a way I had never experienced before. Not just quiet, but hollow, like a body after the soul has left. I turned to go back inside and found that I was alone. The other guards had already retreated to the administrative wing. The summons came a week later. I was called to the regional administration, 2 days by train. A commendation ceremony, they said, recognition for faithful service, perhaps a promotion. I should have felt proud. My father would have felt proud. But as the train carried me toward the city, I couldn't stop thinking about what Jarkov had said in his cell. The state notices loyalty. They will reward you, soon. The city looked the same. Workers, shoppers, children in the parks. But I saw them now, scattered through the crowds. Former inmates, standing at bus stops, sitting on benches. They didn't approach me, but I felt their attention. The regional administration building was near the center of the city. I presented my papers and was directed to the 3rd floor where the regional director waited. He was heavy-set, with a face made for official photographs. He smiled and gestured for me to sit. Tea and small cakes waited on the table. "Comrade Petrenko," he said warmly, "thank you for coming. You have done exceptional work at Facility 12. The reports speak highly of your dedication, your attention to detail, your unwavering commitment to the program's success." I thanked him. I said the words that were expected of me. He nodded, still smiling, that official smile. The state needs more men like you. Men who believe. Men who serve without question. It's rare to find such commitment in these times. I noticed that he held his teacup without drinking from it, his hands perfectly still in a way that seemed familiar. I noticed that he hadn't blinked since I entered the room. "We would like to offer you an opportunity," the director said. "A chance to serve even more effectively, complete clarity, complete loyalty." He set down his teacup with careful precision. "You have earned this, Lev. You have earned the same gift you helped give to so many others." The door behind me opened. I turned and saw 2 men in white coats entering the room, orderlies of the kind I had seen dozens of times at Facility 12. They were carrying restraints. I understood then. I understood everything. I tried to run, bolting for the door, but the orderlies were faster. They caught me by the arms before I could reach it, their grips unyielding as they dragged me back toward the chair. The reward for loyalty was the same as the punishment for crime. The state didn't distinguish. I had spent a year helping to build a machine that processed human beings, and now the machine had come for me. The director wasn't offering me a promotion. He was offering me the same treatment I had watched administered to hundreds of subjects. He was offering me the injection. I said something, I can't remember what, some protest about my service, my dedication, the years I had given to the system. The director watched me with that still smile, unmoved. "You have given us everything," he agreed. "And now you will give us just a little more. You will understand afterward. They all understand." The orderlies took my arms. I struggled, but they were strong and I was tired in a way that went deeper than muscles and bones. Part of me had known this was coming since the moment Jarkov touched my hand through the bars of his cell. Part of me had been waiting for it. They led me down a corridor to a room that looked like the treatment rooms at Facility 12. The same chair, the same restraints, the same monitoring equipment, the same needle filled with the compound that had transformed so many others. I screamed. I begged. I told them I had served the state faithfully my entire life. I told them my father had been a decorated party member. I pulled his party card from my pocket and held it up like a talisman, like it might protect me the way his memory had always protected me before. The director took the card gently from my fingers. "Your father would be proud," he said. "You are serving the state even now. You are serving it better than you ever have before." They strapped me into the chair. I felt the needle enter my arm, cold and precise. I looked at my reflection in the observation window, my face twisted with fear, my eyes wide. The last thing I thought before the compound took hold was that I had spent my whole life believing in the system. I had defended it. I had served it. I had helped it grow. And in the end, the system had believed in nothing but itself. Then, I was somewhere else. I'm in a cell now. Gray walls, a cot I have never left, a door that has never opened. The air tastes of concrete and nothing else. There's no clock. There's only the silence and the slow, crushing weight of time that doesn't end. I don't know how long I've been here. I stopped counting after what felt like the first year. Then I started again after what felt like the fifth. Then I stopped again because the numbers had grown too large to hold in my mind. I can hear others sometimes. Not voices, not words. Just the sense of presence in cells beside mine and above mine and below mine, stretching away in every direction. Millions of us, maybe, all serving our sentences, all waiting in the gray. I think about the real Ruslan Jarkov sometimes, the soldier who came back wrong from Afghanistan. He is here too, somewhere. He has been here since the day they gave him 40 minutes that became forever. I think about my father and the party card the director took from my fingers. He believed loyalty would be rewarded. He died still believing that. I know better now. Sometimes I try to understand what happened. Maybe the compound simply destroyed something in my brain. Maybe this gray place is just what a shattered mind feels like from the inside. That would make sense. That would be science. But then I think about the way they moved. All those reformed subjects turning their heads in unison, smiling that identical smile, knowing things they shouldn't have known. If their minds simply broke, why did they all break the same way? I don't know which answer is worse. That the compound destroys you so completely that what walks out of that chair is barely human anymore. Or that something else is real, something that waits in this place, something that learned to wear our faces. Either way, 1 million of them are out there now, walking Soviet streets, sitting in apartments, raising children, and no one knows. The faces are the same. The names are the same. I sit in my cell. I will sit here forever. Somewhere out there, someone is living my life. Maybe it's me, what is left of me after the compound burned through my mind. Maybe it's something else entirely. I don't know anymore. I'm not sure it matters. I gave them everything. My faith, my silence, my service. In the end, the state gave me exactly what I helped give to thousands of others. Somewhere out there, someone with my face is smiling. I tell myself it's still me. I tell myself minds can heal. But it's so quiet in here. And I think it always will be. That's the end of our time together tonight. I'm Rex. Thank you for letting me be the voice in your ear while the world sleeps. If you haven't joined the Nocturnal crew yet, hit subscribe and turn on notifications to stay locked in. I'm curious to read what you thought about this one. Stay safe, and I'll be back before the sun comes up.